Hi, welcome to Jot Notes, a podcast where we dive into the world of books and the lives of authors. My name is Jenna Green, and I'm a YA fantasy author, author of the Imagine series and the Reborn Mark series. Joining me is our co host and producer, Miranda O. She is a contemporary chick lit author, author of the Chin Up, Tits Out series, and she has the privilege and honor of introducing our guest for today. Hi, Miranda.
Hello, hello. How are you today, Jenna?
I am A-okay. You?
Okay, I am fantastic. Thank you very much for asking. I'm even more thrilled to introduce our guest today. We have Mack Little. Now, she is an author with a variety of life experiences that have aided with the growth and development of her writing. So we're going to really dive deep into how these experiences have molded her to be an author and to, with the stories that she's written. So she writes novels with lots of twists and turns and intrigues. And we'll see this as in her latest release novel, her latest release, Marbles in My Mouth, Daughter of the Hades. So help me welcome Miss Mack Little. How are you?
How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're super thrilled to have you and really dive deep into your latest release and you as an author, like how you became this fantastic author. So I want to dive right into how you got here. So how have your past careers and studies influenced your writing and your path to becoming an author?
Well, I've always wanted to be an author. Well, kind of. At first, I started out, I wanted to be on the stage. I wanted to act. I took acting classes, but when I was around 16 years old, I was accepted into a street improv group called the Atlanta Street Theater. And we were making up stories, to share with kids in in the Atlanta area. And I realized that I liked creating stories and I wanted to continue with that. And so when I got accepted to college, I took up English literature as my major, bent on becoming an author. However, when I graduated with an English degree, there was nothing I could do but teach. And, God bless the teachers of the world, but I didn't think I was capable of doing that. And so
Some days.
yes. And what job could I get to help me pay for a master's degree so I could, do something profitable to support myself? And I couldn't think of anything, so I joined the Army. I've joined the Army for 5 years, and they gave me a full scholarship to get my master's degree in library science. And I became a librarian for about 10 or 15 years. And then I moved over into IT. And so I was just busy living my life. I've always had that dream of writing in the back of my head. And finally, I was, talking to a friend of mine, and they're like, why haven't you written anything? This is what you've always wanted to do. I'm like, yeah, why not? So I got started, but I couldn't finish anything. So I joined Houston's Writers Guild, and I got myself a community, a tribe, and they encouraged me. I joined a critique group. They gave me accountability. I had to write 10 pages every week, and 10 pages by 10 pages, I wrote my first novel at 49, 47, somewhere in there.
You know what? It is never too late to follow your dreams. Jen and I have talked to plenty of people who have done their masters, worked and got their medical degrees, have raised families, have, whatever they've done. And then they've always come back to that I want to be an author. I want to tell a story. And then they do. And at that point, I definitely believe that if you want something, you're going to go after it. Just the timeline, that path is never going to be a straight line. And the timeline is never going to be where you thought it was meant to be in the first place. You needed to learn a lot of life lessons before you were prepared and ready to write the book. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that threw me off is when I was in college and I was taking an independent study in novel writing, and my professor said that I needed to live my life first. And that kind of threw me off. I said, okay, well, novel writing kind of went out the window. I just went on and lived my life, joined the Army, got married, had a kid, and established a career. But this is something that's always been on my mind. Haunting me.
the beautiful ghost in the corner of the room every single night. So now when you say Army, like I'm not gonna lie, I always picture when somebody tells me Army, like battlefield and like machine gun, like bah, 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 and like rolling through the dust. Like is that experiences that you experienced, or was your Army journey, like I know that's not the reality for everybody's Army journey.
So basic training, you get to crawl through the mud and, shoot the guns, and I thought basic training was like the most fun thing. It was like the most fun summer camp ever been to in my life. Even when I was 24, I had already graduated and got my degree in college. So I wasn't really a kid. So when the drill sergeants yelled at me, I just thought that was the greatest thing. This is like the movies. They're yelling at me. Yes. And every time they saw me, they would drop me and make me do push-ups because that was my weakest area. And I was like, thank you. Thank you for helping me with my push-ups.
Like, do you see these muscles?
I know. I love getting dirty. I love getting muddy. And when we went on our marches, we would have these cadences, and it was like being in a musical because the cadences were always a song about, life in the Army and how bad it was. I'm like, yes, I love this. So basic training was like that. I ended up becoming a clerk, and I was deployed to Bosnia. So there was guard duty, and we were the peacekeeping force, so we didn't see any action, but we were walking around with guns and collaborating with other UN forces, which was also awesome. I got to meet Russians, Australians, are real party animals. It was just so I enjoyed it, kind of. I made the best of it, is what I want to say.
Right. Meeting people from different cultures and different backgrounds, I always find enriching. You would never, if you didn't take that path, would you have ever have met or become friends or connected with Russians or Australians or Bosnians? I was an Airbnb host for a few years and met people from like 40 different countries. And now like some of them are my very good friends from countries I can barely pronounce, or countries that I never thought I would go to. And I'm like, so when are we going to go visit your mom and dad out there? So you make the best of the situation, and that's pretty cool. So now, are there aspects and little tweaks, or not tweaks, but like notes of all of your experience with people from around the world? Is that something that you were able to take and implant in your stories?
Oh yes, of course. And also I've always had this love of traveling. When I was in college, my first year, I lived in Mexico for a summer. And then my junior year, I lived in Spain for 6 months. And when I was in the Army, I lived in Germany. And so when I write about all these places, and I take my readers around the world to all these wonderful places. Even now, I still go to Paris once a year when I can. COVID drove me nuts. I'm like sick with wanderlust, and I need to get back to Paris. And a lot of my novels end up being set there, and places around Europe where I visited.
Nice. I love inputting my travel experiences into my books because, you've been there, you've felt it, you've smelt it, your toes have squished between the earth. You've walked down the little back alleys or whatever they are. And so you're able to like recreate that and bring your readers into those moments with you. And I find it a very relatable way to connect and bring my readers in when I do choose to write about, certain things like that. So I love that, not only the Army, but your love of travel have been, put into your books. Now, I kind of want to ask about like pre all this, like, are there aspects of your childhood or perhaps where you grew up that influences your writing?
Oh, absolutely. I grew up in a little enclave. It was a rural area outside of Atlanta. It's Conyers, Georgia. But when I grew up, it was rural. And where I lived was an enclave of houses. It was my grandmother, my aunt, us, a pair of assistants, farmers, and a few other people. And I could, let me tell you, I could go to anyone's house and spend the night and anytime I wanted to. So I kind of did my rounds around the neighborhood, sleeping at people's houses. And there was even one family who couldn't have kids. They made me a bedroom so that I could stay over with them whenever I wanted. So, uh, but it was when I grew up, there was a lot of storytelling. My grandmother, always told me stories about my family and some of the creepy stuff that happened. And my grandmother, Flora Miller, she loved horror like I love horror. She probably planted that seed in me. And I would go to book fairs and I would find horror novels and we'd share them and read them together and discuss them. And sometimes when I spent the night with her, I'd stay up late listening to stories, radio shows that had these little um, horror stories. It was wonderful. So at heart, I'm a horror writer, and even though my latest book is a romance, I tend to get gritty and into the gore because that's my first love.
Oh, but that's awesome. And I think mixing a little bit of genres, like we're able to do that now. We're in a time and a day and age where you can mix the genres, it appeals to more types of readers. And for me as a reader, I love when I get a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Like you just don't know what's going to happen when you turn the page, and it intrigues me. I love that you lived in this little community, that you were safe enough and there was enough trust to kind of flip between house to house to house. That's just not something we hear a lot of anymore these days, unfortunately. If my kid disappears around the corner, I'm like, "Ma, where is she?" Versus where I grew up, it was, you used to flick the lights on or off, or just like come home at sundown whenever that's going to
Exactly.
be.
They would kick us out of the house in the morning and, we have to be back by sundown. That was
Yep.
it. So I was out running in the woods doing, God knows what. I don't want to tell my parents.
Yeah. Please, I don't want to cause any troubles now, years down the road. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Okay, so I got one last question before I pass the torch to Jenna, and Jenna, I must admit that we're pretty much on. We haven't like veered off of tangent a lot.
Not yet.
Yeah, I know. So we're gonna.
I started to think about it when she was talking about push-ups. I'm like, if they had asked me to do a push-up, they would still be waiting. Still be waiting.
10 years later, I'm getting there. Okay, so one last question, and I love this question. So what might people be surprised to learn about you as a person or you as an author? Like, what would be the most surprising thing that outside of what we've learned about you today or what general public knows about you today, what would be that little surprising tidbit, golden nugget?
Oh my God, that is such a great question.
You got
I love
thank Jenna for that one.
I love to tell people stories about my life. And so it's pretty much all out there. What would be surprising? Hmm.
Do you like pineapples on your pizza? Because like that's not acceptable in my world.
Well, at one point in my life, I worked in a youth shelter with troubled youth in Dubuque, Iowa. And that was, a lot of people don't know that. And that was, it was a pretty interesting time because they were trying to diversify the city and bring more minorities in. So there was a lot of political, cultural unrest. And so people were burning crosses and having protests and all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of the kids that came in were in there for hate crimes, but they were they're they were good kids. It was like one of the most rewarding periods of my life because I got to interact with these kids and you know, get to know them and let them get to know me. I feel like I was able to, you know, be an ambassador, I guess.
Make a connection.
You know,
Yeah.
hopefully make a difference and let them see some of the fallacies in what they were learning from the outside. So
yeah,
I don't know.
That would be a pretty impactful time for me if I was you. I would take that and say, you know what, this is something that I'm pretty proud of doing. It was very difficult. It was scary at times, but we made it through together. And I hope that I, you know, just impacted one life just a little itty bitty bit because it would make the time worth it. Because yeah, it's a pretty cool thing. I like it. Well, that was a great answer to a apparently great question.
But she did not answer your pineapple on the pizza question.
That's
no pine. I will answer that because I feel very strongly. No
right?
Pineapple on pizza.
No pineapple on the
there.
pizzas. No, it doesn't. It belongs in your breakfast, in your smoothies, even in your margaritas, but not your pizza. Not a margarita pizza.
The only fruit that goes on a pizza is a tomato.
Yes.
Tomato.
Right?
Yes.
That's okay. Tomato sauce. There. Okay. That's our first tangent of the day. And we found out about all the pineapple on the pizza. And so then we're just able to segue into you telling us a bit more about Daughter of Hades. I can see the cover behind you, but for anyone that is listening and not viewing, or we always get, you know, you can pick up a book and you can read the description, but from the author's mouth, it's a little bit different. You get a little bit more. So how would you describe the book?
Well, Daughter of Hades is a historical romance set in the 17th century with persons of color as the main characters. So the main character, Denny, is an enslaved woman on the island of Barbados. She and her brother escaped slavery on a pirate ship called the Hades. And on the pirate ship, she meets a Chinese-born sailor and falls in love. And during their travel across the Caribbean, they you know, run into a powder keg of enslaved people, indentured servants, and maroons and pirates, and it's a swashbuckling pirate tale, basically. And what's different about it is, though, it's difficult to write a historical romance with a Black person as the main character when during that time period the mid-Atlantic slave trade was like in full swing. And so I didn't want that to be my focus. I wanted to show another dimension of the lives of people of color in the Caribbean during this time, and not rely on the narrative of Black pain, like a lot of people, you know, that has been done in other novels.
So trying to do something different with it.
Yeah,
with
I
that
like
history.
Not only trying to do something different, but just to show another dimension of our experience. I mean, another reason I wrote the novel, or I write anything, is because you rarely see Black people or people of color as the main characters of commercial fiction, or in sci-fi, in fantasy, historical romance. And the only time when I was looking for books to read, the only time I was able to find them was when someone was writing about slavery. Well, okay, yeah, but what else happened?
Right.
Who were these people? And when people who were not people of color wrote about slaves and slavery, it was just very one dimensional, and they didn't show that the enslaved people were people with hopes and dreams who fell in love, had adventure, were heroic, and
Mhm.
did all these other things. So that's what I want to capture in Daughter of Hades and everything I write.
I like that. I like that a lot. Now, I have a question. Sorry, Jenna, I don't want to steal your thunder, but like when researching like historical fiction, Jenna and I have talked about this with past authors. Is historical fiction takes a lot of research. Like, was
Mhm.
that a challenge that you came across with your research where the history was a lot about slavery and not a lot about everything else? Or were there resources out there where you could get the information, or how is the research process for you?
Well, there is a lot of information out there. You just have to know how to look for it. And being a librarian, I was able to do the research. I was able to find what I was looking for, and a lot of the books written in that at that time was written through the lens of white males. So I had to take that into account, and I relied quite a bit on scholarly journals that that showed the lives of Maroons who were a brave, and glorious people as far as I'm concerned. I'm so enamored of this group of people. Maroons were enslaved people who escaped slavery, and they lived on their own. And in my context, they lived in Jamaica, and they raided the plantations. They worked with buccaneers to raid the plantations and raid the island, and they were a force to be reckoned with. And they actually became kind of like their own little republic in Jamaica after the British invaded. So they're like little they're they're like little morsels of stories out there that I grabbed onto and really studied. And also, my other main character is Li Zhang. He's a Chinese sailor, and I studied I studied Latin American history when I was in college because Spanish was my minor, and I studied their culture, their politics, and I never heard about Chinese or Asian communities in Latin America and Mexico, but they were there, and the Chinese traded silver with Mexico, in the 16th century and earlier. And the Portuguese had a colony in Macau, and so there was a lot of interaction. There were Asian communities in Latin America, and I want to bring that to the forefront. I want to bring a character to reflect that there were, you know, other people there besides black
I'm learning so much. I was
whites.
like, what's a maroon? What? And I feel like I'm fairly well read and well studied, but you know, until you talk to a historian or an author that has really, really dived in and learned, you get all sorts of information. But then how do you, so you have all this research, you have all this knowledge, but you have the narrative to tell. How do you
Mhm.
balance that so that the facts are not overriding the joy of just the story, the adventure, the romance?
Right. So when I begin with an idea, I start doing my research. I start reading around the subject, and I find places where I can insert my characters. And that's kind of how my research does. It's kind of nebulous at the beginning. What The only thing that's really concrete and laid out for me are the characters. I do a character sheet. I have extensive, like 15-page character sheets so that I know every aspect of their lives and their personalities and their, hopes and dreams and all of that. And so once I have their history solidified, I just insert them into the stories that I had been reading about history. And then I don't use an outline, but as I write, I write it out longhand. I was like, okay, this happened and blah, blah, blah. And then when I type it up, I go in and I do the research on the particulars, like, what kind of food did they eat, and what was the political climate and all of that going around the story. And sometimes I have to modify my story to conform with what I've learned from my research. But mostly it's the characters that are driving the story, and I just pull the research in and try to mix it together as well as I can.
Well, and you said something really important in that whether you're a plotter or a planter, or I'm a hybrid planter, whether you have outlines or not, what we found in Miranda and I interviewing lots of different people is that whether they have a full outline and they know everything that's going to happen chapter by chapter, or whether they don't, what they do enter with the process is 90% of the time they know their characters. They know who they're going to tell the story about. And then some of them, and know exactly what's going to happen. Other people, we're going to take this character on a journey, but they know who they're writing about most of the time.
Right. And that's the most important. And knowing who I'm writing about, the character comes alive and they have a life of their own and they make their own decisions. So I'm just along for the ride. They're telling me what to write. So, and I go for walks every day and my characters are talking to me. I can hear their conversations. I know it sounds schizophrenic, but they're telling me what to write.
There's a meme about that.
Having an outline is pointless for me.
The characters are going to do their own. There's a meme about that where it's like, I'm a writer. The characters do their thing and I just write up the incident report. Whatever happens.
That's who I am.
That's a good note to end on. You answered like 9 of my questions before I asked them because you're intuitive, and I was like, oh yeah, I wanted to know that, and I wanted to know that, and I didn't want to know that until she mentioned it, but now I do. So
now I do.
Yeah, this was a great conversation.
Awesome.
Just before we wrap up, if readers want to buy your books or learn more about them or connect with you, where would we send them?
Okay, well, my books are on Amazon, first of all. So just search for Mack Little on Amazon. And I have a website that has links to my books, and that's Mack, MACK-little.com. And you can find me on Facebook at author Mack Little, and on Instagram and Twitter, I am Zen Baby, ZenBabie.
There you go.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
That
was a lot of information and inspiration tucked into 30 minutes. That was a jam-packed one. Just before we go, we need to send a big shout out to our show sponsors. So thank you to Writers Corner Network and Creative Edge Publicity. And of course, a big thank you and shout out to all our viewers and all our listeners. Thank you. And thank you, Mack Little, for coming and teaching us all sorts of things.
Thank you. Have a good one, guys.
Pleasure.